the summer of 1940, the Third Reich was attempting to bomb Britain into submission. Roosevelt telephoned Mackenzie King and said they had to meet immediately to discuss what they would do if Britain fell. King went for a haircut at the Chateau Laurier, and leaving all his advisors behind, got into his car and headed for the American border. His destination was Ogdensburg, a small town on the St. Lawrence River, just a 90-minute drive from Ottawa. Mackenzie King met with Franklin Roosevelt in the president's private railway car, and together they discussed the recent events in Europe until the early hours of the morning. Roosevelt was worried about whether Canada would be vulnerable in the event that Britain failed. Mackenzie King worried about whether America would come to Canada's aid if need be. Roosevelt jotted a few particulars down on a piece of paper. And the next morning, while the president reviewed the local militia, a 6-sentence statement announcing the formation of a permanent joint board of defense was released to the press. King was acting completely on his own authority. Neither his cabinet or parliament had been consulted about the agreement. And out of this remarkably informal meeting began the whole complex Canadian-American defense relationship that exists today. At Ogdensburg, King exchanged Canada's allegiance to a faltering British Empire for an assured association with the rising superpower to the south. By the time the United States entered the war, Canada had already become Britain's arsenal. As a result of Ogdensburg and subsequent agreements, we became a part of American defense production as well. Mackenzie King put American-born Minister of Munitions and Supply, C.D. Howe, in charge of Canada's industrial war machine. Howe recruited the brightest executives from Canadian industry to work with him, and together they amazed the other allies with their achievements. If there was not a private company to do the job, Howe's solution was to create a government-owned Crown Corporation. During the war, Canada became the 4th largest industrial power in the world. Many Canadians were asking the question, how? Before the war, during the Depression, most Canadian families would have been hard-pressed to buy a bicycle. Hundreds of thousands of people couldn't even find a job. Then within a few years, we were building bombs, jeeps, thousands of tanks, and aircraft like this Lancaster bomber. Unemployment ended, and thousands of women flooded into the labor force for the first time. Wartime provided the incentive for the government to do what it wouldn't do during the Depression: spend money, massive amounts of money. The tax revenues and profits that rolled back from the soaring economy gave Canadians the 2nd highest standard of living in the world. But number 1 was the United States of America. Her economic rivals in Europe and Japan lay in ruins. The American dollar was the standard by which all other currencies were judged. The new president, Harry Truman, had all the economic levers in his hands. 3/4 of the world's gold, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the military power to back it up.
They didn't think, a person like King, people thought of empires as old-fashioned things, like the British Empire, the French Empire. They didn't really see sufficiently clearly that the Americans had established the greatest empire since Rome, probably the greatest empire of all time.
Mackenzie King toyed with the idea of an economic union with the American empire. He instructed his bureaucrats to begin working out the details for a free trade agreement. He insisted that this be done in complete secrecy. King was reaching the end of his political career and spending more and more time at his retreat in the Gatineau Hills, wandering among his collection of ruins. This ruin is called the Temple. This was the Prime Minister's special spot, almost holy ground. He came here to sit and ponder his most pressing problems. In 1948, the most important thing on Mackenzie King's mind were the secret talks on free trade going on between Canada and the United States. Mackenzie King brooded on the issue for several months, and then, at the 11th hour, much to the consternation and amazement of his close advisors, he canceled the talks and ordered all the papers concerning free trade to be destroyed. Perhaps the ever-shrewd King was remembering that Laurier's free trade policy had been a political disaster for the Liberal Party. He later claimed he acted because he realized that the ultimate American objective was complete control of the continent, and that free trade would be the first step toward the end of Canadian sovereignty. With or without free trade, Canada boomed in the post-war years.
Fortune Wheels, Steeplechase, and Midway may have their lucky winners, but here's a lottery that tops them all. For each of these veterans and his family, the prize is a bright new home.
After years of depression and war, everyone wanted to settle down, buy a home, and have kids. Unemployment was 2.5%, and the stores were full of all the modern conveniences. Thousands of displaced people from Europe added their skills to an expanding economy, and the population swelled by 2 million.
Toronto's expansion since the end of the war has been so great and so rapid that the city is in danger of being strangled by its own prosperity.
Let's see what the world would lose if Canada suddenly disappeared.
Duże żeli що Канада знищена.
Hollywood says goodbye to a $60 million market. The Canadian disaster has knocked the bottom out of the stock market. In the world's capitals, hurried meetings are considering the new situation.
A little hard to take seriously, eh? Well, in the 1950s, Canada was being described as the business success story of the decade. Time magazine reported that Canada had the most impressive industrial development of any country in the world, and that included the United States. There had been a 50% increase in the standard of living. National production had quadrupled. And in 1951, the Canadian government even enjoyed a surplus of nearly $1 billion. And according to Time, much of the credit for all this went to the man on the cover, C.D. Howe. Time magazine called him the minister of everything, and he was everywhere, driving the economy forward with the same zeal he had brought to the war. Under Prime Minister Louis Saint-Laurent, it was said that Canada was run like a big business. C.D. Howe was the chief executive officer, taking care of deals, while chairman of the board, Uncle Louis, handled public relations.
At Augusta, Georgia, aboard a caddy car, President Eisenhower and his guest, Prime Minister Saint-Laurent of Canada, ride out for a round of golf. The Prime Minister sends it driving. It's a 9-hole game of best ball golf. Now the President whams it. The two leaders are both enthusiastic golf players, and their match demonstrates the friendly relations between the U.S. and Canada. The score, just as it should be, all even.
An American government report, the Paley Report, told President Eisenhower that if he was going to stay on top of his game, he would have to be chums with Canada.
The Americans are running out of many strategic and basic resources. And this was all in their Paler Report of 1952, which pointed out to the Americans the truth that by 1980 they were going to be in a desperate way in certain strategic resources. And that they went through every section of the resource picture. And they said that our policy should be to get out and get control of the basic resources in countries which were sound. And they recommended Canada as a sound place to get into because we're very reliable.
The man in charge of securing American interests worldwide was Secretary of State John Foster Dulles.
The first thing I want to make clear is that I consider that my job is to work for the people of the United States.
Dulles once said that there are two ways of conquering a nation. One is by force of arms, the other is to gain control of its economy. The Liberal government believed that American investment was essential to keep the post-war boom going. So the American businessman, whether he was here to buy a mine or open a branch plant, became a regular customer.
I think Toronto is a wonderful town, smart and up to date, just like a good American city. Makes me feel like I'm back in Cleveland.